Buckle up because this is not your typical revenge story. I still can't believe everything that happened, and I'm the one who lived through it. I'm not proud of what I did, but I can't say I regret it either. Strap in, because this ride is about to get wild. It all started on New Year's Eve last year. My wife, Anna, and I had been married for 5 years. On the surface, everything seemed fine. We had a nice home, stable jobs, and a shared dream of starting a family. But cracks had started forming, small ones, easy to ignore if you weren't paying attention. Anna had become distant. At first, I chalked it up to work stress. But then there were longer hours at the office, mysterious girls' nights, where she'd come home smelling like cologne, and a strange coldness between us that I couldn't put my finger on. Still, I convinced myself I was imagining things. After all, we were heading into the new year together, and we had plans to celebrate with my extended family at a traditional bathhouse, a New Year's tradition we'd honored for years. The bathhouse was one of those old-style places, private hot pools, stone walls, dim lighting. My family rented out the entire place for the night. It was supposed to be relaxing, a fresh start. But that night changed everything. My uncle, Mark, was there too. Mark was my father's younger brother, only about 10 years older than me. He was charming, confident, and always had this sly grin on his face. People liked him. I used to like him. The evening started normally enough. Laughter, food, and a little too much champagne. At one point, Anna excused herself, saying she needed some air. Mark followed not long after, saying he was going to check on her. A weird feeling settled in my gut, but I brushed it off. Paranoia, I told myself. But then, my cousin, Sarah, pulled me aside. You might want to check the private pools, she said softly, her eyes full of something I couldn't place. My stomach dropped. My heart started pounding in my chest. I walked down the stone corridor leading to the private baths. The flickering lanterns cast long shadows on the walls. My footsteps echoed. And then I heard it, soft voices, hushed laughter. Anna's voice. Mark's voice. I froze. The door to one of the private baths wasn't closed all the way. Through the crack, I saw them, my wife and my uncle, together. My world shattered. I turned and walked away, my body moving on autopilot. My heart was racing, my vision was blurry, and I felt like I was underwater. But in that moment, through the haze of shock and betrayal, I felt something else rise up inside me. Not sadness. Not anger. Cold calculation. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I went back to the main hall, grabbed a glass of champagne, and plastered a smile on my face. I had a plan forming in my head, a plan so cruel, so calculated, that even I was afraid of the thoughts swirling in my mind. This wasn't going to be a simple confrontation. No. This was going to be a reckoning. I stood there in the main hall of the bathhouse, surrounded by laughter and clinking glasses, but all I could hear was the faint echo of their voices from the private pool. My wife. My uncle. I forced a smile when someone cracked a joke nearby, but my mind was already in overdrive. I couldn't confront them, not yet. Confrontation would end in shouting, denial, maybe a half-hearted apology. No, they deserved something more. I glanced over at Anna when she returned to the hall, her hair slightly damp, her cheeks flushed. She caught my eye and smiled, like nothing had happened. Mark strolled in a moment later, casual as ever, holding a glass of whiskey. I raised my glass to him across the room. He grinned and raised his back. The audacity. But I wasn't going to let anger cloud my judgment. No, anger was sloppy. Revenge needed precision, patience, and a little theatrical flair. I spent the rest of the night watching them, how their eyes flickered toward each other when they thought no one was looking, how Anna avoided being too close to me but stayed close enough to maintain appearances. And then, an idea hit me. A cold, perfect idea. I turned to my cousin Sarah, the one who had warned me. Hey, Sarah. Mind helping me with something? She raised an eyebrow but nodded. Sure. What's up? Not here. Let's step outside. We walked out into the cool night air, away from prying ears. I laid out the beginnings of my plan. Sarah's eyes widened, and then, slowly, she nodded. You're serious about this? She asked. Dead serious. She hesitated but eventually agreed. All right. I'll help. But, are you sure you want to go this far? I looked her dead in the eyes. They deserve this, Sarah. Every bit of it. The next morning, the hangover haze had settled over most of the guests. People were packing up their bags, exchanging hugs, and saying their goodbyes. Anna was cheerful, even affectionate toward me. She kissed my cheek as we loaded our things into the car, acting every bit the loving wife. It was nauseating. In the weeks that followed, I played the perfect husband. I brought Anna flowers, cooked her favorite meals, and even planned a surprise getaway for us. All the while, I was gathering evidence. You see, cheaters slip up when they think they've gotten away with it. Text messages. Odd bank transactions. A second phone hidden in her gym bag. It wasn't hard to piece together the pattern. The hotel receipts were the final nail in the coffin. And Mark? Oh, Mark was just as careless. He bragged to his friends, men I had known since childhood, about his little adventure. He spoke like he had conquered something, as if he had achieved some grand victory. It was almost laughable how confident they both were. But their arrogance was about to cost them everything. I started putting the next phase of my plan into motion. It required careful timing, a bit of financial maneuvering, and a favor from an old college friend who happened to work in IT security. Anna had always been proud of her social image, her Instagram perfect life, her carefully curated online persona. So, naturally, her downfall had to start there. And Mark? Well, let's just say I had something special planned for him, too. By the time I was done, neither of them would ever forget what they did. End of part 2. Stay tuned for part 3. Next. ChatGPT. ChatGPT. Title: My wife betrayed me with my uncle on New Year's Eve, so I took the most calculated revenge. Part 3 tense. The weeks following New Year's were a masterclass in self-control. Every day, I woke up beside Anna, pretending everything was fine. I'd kiss her goodbye in the morning, tell her I loved her, and watch as she gave me that same fake smile, the one I now recognized all too well. But behind closed doors, the gears of my plan were turning. First, I focused on Anna. Her curated social media presence was her pride and joy. Every picture, every caption, every story was polished to perfection. So, naturally, that's where I'd start. With the help of my friend in IT, I managed to access Anna's cloud storage. It was easier than you'd think. Turns out, people are shockingly bad at choosing secure passwords. And there it was, a treasure trove of screenshots, messages, and photos she thought were safely hidden. Conversations with Mark, plans for secret rendezvous, and even mocking little jokes about me. I copied everything. Every single file. But that wasn't enough. I needed something more damning. Enter Sarah. I'd asked her to get close to Anna again, to casually bring up Mark in conversation. Anna, not suspecting a thing, let her guard down. One night Sarah called me. "You're not going to believe this," she said, her voice low. "What?" "They're planning a trip. Next weekend. A cabin upstate. Mark booked it under his name, but Anna's going with him." I clenched my jaw, but my voice stayed calm. Perfect. This was it, the opportunity I'd been waiting for. I told Sarah to stay quiet and let them think they were being clever. Meanwhile, I was preparing phase 2 of my plan. The next weekend arrived, and Anna told me she was going on a girls' spa weekend. She kissed me goodbye at the door, luggage in hand, and I smiled back, playing the fool one last time. Once she was gone, I grabbed my keys and started driving. The cabin was nestled deep in the woods, a picturesque little hideaway, perfect for a romantic getaway. But this time, it would become something else entirely. I parked a little way down the road, out of sight, and made my way through the trees until I had a clear view of the cabin's front porch. And there they were, Anna and Mark, laughing, smiling, holding hands as they carried their bags inside. My stomach turned, but I forced myself to stay focused. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Every moment. Every embrace. Every stolen kiss. After about an hour, I crept closer. Through one of the cabin's windows, I could see their bags left carelessly in the living room. And there, sitting on top of Mark's duffel, was his phone. Perfect. I waited until the sun had set, and the lights inside the cabin had dimmed. Then, I crept to the porch and jimmied open one of the side windows. It was almost too easy. These rental cabins weren't exactly Fort Knox. Once inside, I grabbed Mark's phone and quietly slipped back out. Back in my car, I connected the phone to my laptop and began pulling data. Messages, emails, photos, it was all there. But one text exchange in particular made my blood run cold. It wasn't about Anna. It was about money. Tens of thousands of dollars siphoned from a family account, an account my father had set up for emergencies. Mark had been stealing from our family. I sat there in the dark, staring at the screen. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore, this was about greed. And now, I had everything I needed. Anna and Mark thought they were in control. They thought they were untouchable. But they had no idea that their entire world was about to crumble. I sat in my car for hours, staring at the evidence I'd pulled from Mark's phone. The betrayal was one thing, but the stolen money? That was something else entirely. My father had worked his whole life to build our family's finances. He wasn't a millionaire, but he was smart with investments, always thinking about the future. And Mark? Mark had been siphoning money from the family emergency fund for years. For what? Expensive vacations? Gifts for my wife? My fingers hovered over the screen of my phone. A part of me wanted to storm back into that cabin and confront them right there. But no. That would be messy. I wanted everything. The truth, their reputations, their futures. I wanted it all to shatter in one perfectly orchestrated moment. I took a deep breath and drove home. The next day, I called my father. Dad, I need to talk to you about something serious. But I need you to trust me and stay calm. Son, what's wrong? It's about Mark. And it's about the family fund. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, my father's voice came back, low and steady. Come over. Now. When I arrived at my parents' house, my father was already sitting at the dining table, financial documents spread out before him. My mother hovered nearby, looking anxious. Tell me everything, my father said. So I did. I laid it all out, the texts, the transactions, the stolen money, and yes, the affair. My mother gasped and covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. My father, however, went completely still. When I finished, he looked at me and said one thing. What do we do next? I pulled out my laptop and showed him my plan. You see, I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to make sure they lost everything. Step 1, the financial audit. I helped my father contact a financial investigator. Mark had left a paper trail so sloppy that it was almost insulting. Within a few days, the investigator confirmed everything I had shown my father. Mark had embezzled nearly $75,000 from the family fund over the past 3 years. Step 2, the social explosion. I had all the texts, photos, and incriminating evidence from both Anna and Mark. I drafted an anonymous email and prepared to send it to everyone in our social circle, family members, friends, colleagues. But I wasn't done yet. Step 3, the confrontation. I wanted to confront them, publicly. And what better setting than our upcoming family gathering? You see, every February, our family hosts a reunion dinner. It's formal, filled with speeches, toasts, and carefully maintained appearances. Everyone would be there. And this year, Anna and Mark would be guests of honor. I spent the next week preparing meticulously. I even bought a brand new suit for the occasion. Anna, completely unaware, was back to playing the doting wife. She'd returned from her spa weekend, refreshed and cheerful. At night she'd curl up next to me, her head on my shoulder, as if nothing had happened. It was sickening. Mark, on the other hand, was starting to sweat. The financial investigator had made initial contact with him, asking about the missing money. I could tell he was panicking, but he was still trying to play it cool in family group chats. The night of the reunion arrived. Anna looked stunning in a long emerald dress. She clung to my arm as we entered the venue, her smile radiant. Mark was already there, laughing with relatives, a whiskey glass in hand. I felt nothing but ice in my veins. Dinner was served, and the evening carried on like any other reunion. Speeches were made, glasses were raised, and everyone seemed content. But then, it was my turn to speak. I stood up, holding my glass, and tapped it lightly with a fork. The room fell silent. "I'd like to say a few words," I began, my voice steady. Anna smiled at me from across the table, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Mark leaned back in his chair, his grin plastered on his face. I took a deep breath. Family is built on trust. It's built on love, loyalty, and honesty. And tonight I'd like to talk about two people who have betrayed every single one of those values. The mood in the room shifted. Murmurs started to spread, and I could see Anna's smile falter. Mark's grin disappeared entirely. I pulled my phone from my pocket and connected it to the projector screen at the end of the dining hall. And then I pressed play. The texts. The photos. The screenshots. Every moment of their betrayal played out on the big screen for our entire family to see. Anna's face went pale. Mark's jaw dropped. My mother buried her face in her hands, and my father sat stone still, his face like granite. When the final message appeared on the screen, the one where Mark joked about the money he'd stolen, silence fell over the room. I turned to face them. Mark. Anna. Do either of you have anything to say for yourselves? Anna opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Mark just stared at me, frozen. Nothing? That's what I thought. I set down the microphone, grabbed my coat, and walked out of the venue. But this was far from over. The silence in that dining hall haunted me as I walked away. Not because I felt regret. No, not even close. But because I knew the storm I had unleashed was only just beginning. I didn't stick around to see the aftermath. I didn't want to hear Anna's stammered excuses or watch Mark's pitiful attempts at damage control. I wanted them to sit in the wreckage of their choices, exposed and vulnerable, with nowhere to hide. But as I drove home, my phone started buzzing. First, it was Sarah. Holy! I can't even describe what's happening here. Anna is sobbing. Mark tried to deny everything, but the evidence, it's too much. People are leaving, and your dad just told Mark to never set foot in his house again. Good, I replied, my voice flat. But hey, are you okay? I hesitated before answering. Yeah. I'm fine. But was I? The weight of the betrayal, the months of planning, the sheer emotional toll, it was catching up to me. Still, the plan wasn't finished. There were 2 more dominoes left to fall. The next day, my father froze Mark's access to all family accounts. The financial investigator had already built a damning case, and Mark was looking at legal consequences. But I wanted more than just legal trouble. I wanted humiliation. I sent an anonymous tip to Mark's workplace, complete with evidence of his embezzlement and his affair with his nephew's wife. Mark worked in a mid-level managerial position at a respectable company, one that prided itself on integrity and family values. Within 48 hours, Mark was fired. His reputation in both professional and family circles was in shambles. He had no job, no savings, and nowhere to turn. Sarah told me he was crashing at a distant cousin's house because no one else in the family would let him through their doors. Anna had always cared about appearances. Her Instagram followers, her curated posts, her perfect life, aesthetic, it was her entire identity. So, naturally, I made sure everyone knew the truth. I uploaded screenshots of her texts with Mark, the hotel receipts, and carefully selected messages to an anonymous social media account. The account went viral within hours. People started commenting on her posts, calling her out, tagging her friends. Anna tried to deactivate her social media accounts, but the damage was done. Friends stopped replying to her messages. Her coworkers at her small marketing firm caught wind of the scandal, and she was quietly asked to take some time off. Her reputation, both online and offline, was obliterated. But here's the thing, Anna wasn't done trying to manipulate the narrative. She showed up at my house 3 days later. I heard the knock on the door late at night. When I opened it, Anna was standing there, makeup smeared from crying, clutching a small bag. "Please, can we talk?" she whispered. I stepped aside and let her in. She sat on the couch, wringing her hands, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I don't know what I was thinking. I was stupid, I was selfish, and I've ruined everything." I sat across from her, arms crossed, watching her unravel. "I never wanted to hurt you," she continued. "Mark, he was just... I don't even know how it happened." I raised an eyebrow. "You don't know how it happened? You don't know how months of lying, sneaking around, and stealing moments behind my back happened?" She flinched. "You destroyed everything, Anna." "And for what? Some fleeting thrill with my uncle?" She started sobbing again, head in her hands. "Please. I want to fix this. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll change. Just please don't let this be the end." I let the silence hang in the air for a long time before I spoke. "Anna, I don't hate you. I really don't. But I'll never forgive you. And I will never, ever trust you again." Her face crumpled, but I wasn't finished. "You made your choice. And now you have to live with it." I stood up and opened the front door. "Goodbye, Anna." She stood slowly, wiping her face, and walked out into the night without another word. I closed the door and locked it behind her. The fallout in the days that followed was brutal. Mark tried reaching out to me, apologizing, pleading for forgiveness, but I blocked him without a second thought. Anna moved out of our shared apartment and went to stay with a distant cousin. I heard she was jobless, friendless, and utterly alone. For the first time in months, I felt peace. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one final move to make. The days following Anna's departure were strangely quiet. The silence in my home was heavy but not suffocating. It was freeing. But even though Anna and Mark were reeling from the fallout, there was still one more phase to my plan, a final nail in the coffin. See, revenge isn't just about exposing someone's wrongdoing. It's about ensuring they can't crawl back to the surface and pretend nothing happened. I wanted them to remember. Every day. Anna had been staying with her cousin, a distant relative on her mother's side who lived about an hour away. Sarah kept me updated. Apparently, Anna had been spending her days in bed, ignoring calls, and trying to piece together some semblance of a plan. Mark, on the other hand, had hit rock bottom. No job, no home, and a family that had completely cut him off. Last I heard, he was couch surfing with an old friend who seemed to pity him more than anything. But now, it was time to tie up the last loose end, divorce. I reached out to a lawyer, someone sharp, efficient, and ruthless. I handed over everything I had, the messages, the photos, the receipts. Everything. When the divorce papers were finally drafted, they weren't just standard documents. No, these were designed with surgical precision. Anna would walk away with nothing. No assets, no financial support, no leverage whatsoever. She would leave with only what she had brought into the marriage, which, thanks to her obsession with designer handbags and expensive weekend getaways, wasn't much. But I didn't stop there. I drafted one final email. This one wasn't anonymous. I signed my name proudly at the bottom. It went out to every mutual acquaintance Anna and I had, family members, friends, coworkers, even her former boss. In it I told the truth. Not exaggerated, not embellished, just cold, hard facts. The affair, the lies, the stolen money. I attached screenshots and photos, leaving no room for doubt. And then I hit send. Sarah called me a few days later. You're not going to believe this, she said, almost breathless. What happened? Anna tried to come back home. She showed up at your parents' house, crying, begging for someone to take her in. Your mom, she couldn't even look at her. Your dad told her to leave and never come back. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. And Mark? I asked. Oh, he's done for. Some of his old friends have started avoiding him completely. Word about the stolen money spread fast, and apparently, he's burned every professional bridge he ever had. Good. But what Sarah said next caught me off guard. Anna, she mentioned she might leave town. She said she can't stay here anymore. Too many people know. Too many people hate her. I didn't respond right away. Part of me thought leaving town was the easy way out for her, but another part of me realized it didn't matter. She could run as far as she wanted, but she'd still have to live with herself. 1 week later, I was at a cafe downtown when I saw him, Mark. He was sitting alone at a corner table, staring into a cup of coffee like it held the answers to his problems. His clothes were wrinkled, his beard was uneven, and his hair looked like it hadn't been washed in days. He spotted me as I walked past, and for a moment, our eyes locked. Then he raised a hand, almost hesitantly, as if asking for a moment of my time. Against my better judgment, I sat down across from him. I know I can't fix this, he said, his voice hoarse. But I need you to know that I regret it. All of it. I messed up, and I know I can't take it back. I stared at him, my face unreadable. You regret getting caught, Mark? Not what you did. He flinched like I'd slapped him. You destroyed our family, I continued. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed everyone. My parents, your brother, everyone who ever trusted you. Mark swallowed hard, looking down at his hands. I've lost everything, he whispered. Good. I stood up, leaving him sitting there with his guilt and his lukewarm coffee. A month later, the divorce was finalized. Anna didn't contest the terms. Maybe she was too ashamed, or maybe she just didn't have the energy to fight anymore. She moved out of town shortly after. I heard she was staying with a distant aunt in another state, trying to start over. Mark? Last I heard, he was working odd jobs, barely scraping by. As for me, I started rebuilding. It wasn't easy. The betrayal still haunted me, and trust didn't come easily anymore. But every day, I felt lighter. Freer. One evening, Sarah came over for dinner. To new beginnings, she said, raising her glass. To new beginnings, I echoed. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. But just when I thought everything was over, when I thought the dust had finally settled, I received a message that changed everything. It was from an unknown number. And all it said was, You think this is over? Think again. Title: My wife betrayed me with my uncle on New Year's Eve, so I took the most calculated revenge. Part 7 out of 10. The message sat on my screen, glaring back at me with an almost mocking presence. You think this is over? Think again. My heart didn't race, and my palms didn't sweat. Instead, I felt a chilling calm wash over me. Whoever sent this, Mark, Anna, or someone else entirely, didn't realize that I had nothing left to lose. For days, the message lingered in my mind. I didn't respond. I didn't react. But I kept my guard up. Every knock at the door, every shadow in the corner of my eye, I noticed them all. Then, 2 nights later, I came home to find my living room window shattered. Glass crunched under my boots as I stepped inside. Nothing seemed to be stolen, nothing was out of place. But there, in the middle of my coffee table, was a single photograph. It was a picture of me. Taken recently. I was walking out of a grocery store, keys in hand, wearing the same jacket I had on that night. Someone had been following me. I turned the photo over. Written on the back in sharp, uneven handwriting were the words, You took everything from me. Now I'll take everything from you. I didn't call the police. Whoever this was, they weren't interested in being subtle anymore. And I wasn't about to play into their hands by panicking. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Sarah. When she arrived, I showed her the photo and the message. She sat quietly for a moment, processing it all. "This is getting dangerous," she said finally. "You need to be careful." "I know," I replied. "But I'm not backing down." Sarah leaned forward, her expression serious. "Then you need to find out who's behind this before they go any further." For the next few days, I stayed sharp. I changed up my routine, parked in different places, avoided predictable patterns. But the messages kept coming, cryptic, threatening, always designed to keep me on edge. Then, on a cold Wednesday night, I spotted him. A figure standing across the street from my house, half hidden in the shadows. He was watching me. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my coat and stormed outside, my footsteps loud against the pavement. But as I got closer, the figure turned and bolted down the alley. I chased him. My breath came in sharp bursts as I pushed myself harder, rounding corners and leaping over trash cans. But eventually I lost him. What I didn't lose, however, was the wallet he had dropped in his rush to escape. Inside I found an ID. It wasn't Mark. It wasn't Anna. It was someone I didn't recognize. The name on the ID was Liam Parker. A face stared back at me, a young man, mid-20s, dark hair, tired eyes. "Who the hell are you, Liam?" The next day, I did some digging. Turns out, Liam Parker was an old co-worker of Mark's. They had worked together years ago at one of Mark's previous jobs, a job he had been fired from after another financial scandal. The pieces started clicking into place. Mark must have called in a favor. Liam was acting on his behalf, running errands, sending threats, breaking into my house. It was pathetic, really. But now I had a face, a name, and an address. That evening, I drove across town to a rundown apartment complex. Liam's place was on the 3rd floor, lights dimmed through the grimy window. I knocked on his door, firm and unyielding. After a long pause, he cracked it open just an inch. His eyes went wide when he saw me. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, forcing him back into his cluttered living room. We stood there, staring at each other in silence. "You're going to tell me everything," I said. Liam's shoulders slumped, and he sank onto the stained couch. "It wasn't my idea," he muttered. "Mark called me. He said you ruined his life, and he just wanted to even the score." "So you thought stalking me, threatening me, and breaking into my house would even the score?" He didn't answer. "Where's Mark now?" Liam hesitated before finally giving up the address of an old motel on the outskirts of town. It was over. The motel was as grim as I expected, neon lights flickering overhead, paint peeling from the walls, a faint smell of mildew hanging in the air. Room 107. I knocked once, twice. No answer. I tried the handle. Unlocked. Inside, Mark was sitting on the edge of a creaky bed, a bottle of cheap whiskey in his hand. He looked up at me, eyes bloodshot and sunken. "So, this is where you've ended up," I said. He didn't respond. "You had a good life, Mark. A family that loved you, a stable career, people who trusted you. And you threw it all away." He let out a hollow laugh. "You think you're better than me, huh? You think you've won?" I shook my head. "There's no winning here, Mark. You did this to yourself." He took a shaky sip from the bottle, his hands trembling. "What now?" he said weakly. "Now? Now you live with this. Every single day." I turned and walked out, leaving him there in the dim light of that rotting motel room. As I stepped back into the cold night air, I realized something. Revenge doesn't heal you. It doesn't erase the betrayal or fix the scars. But it does close the chapter. And for me, that was enough. Or so I thought. Because the story wasn't over yet. For a moment, as I walked away from that rundown motel, I thought it was over. Mark was broken, Anna had disappeared, and Liam was nothing more than a failed accomplice. But life has a cruel way of reminding you that loose ends are never truly tied up. It started 2 days later. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing, relentless, desperate. It was Sarah. You need to come to your parents' house. Now. Her voice was sharp, clipped with panic. I didn't ask questions. I threw on a jacket and drove straight there, the pit in my stomach growing heavier with every mile. When I arrived, the scene stopped me cold. My parents' living room was in chaos. Furniture overturned, glass shattered, family photos scattered across the floor. My mother was sitting on the couch, trembling, clutching a cup of tea Sarah must have given her. My father stood near the window, fists clenched at his sides. What happened? I asked, my voice low. My father turned to me, his face pale with anger. Mark happened. Apparently, Mark had shown up uninvited, drunk and furious. He forced his way inside, yelling incoherently about betrayal, about revenge, about how everything had been taken from him. My father, still recovering from a recent surgery, couldn't physically restrain him, and my mother was too terrified to intervene. Eventually, Mark had stormed out, leaving destruction in his wake. But not before leaving a note. It was scrawled on the back of an old receipt, written in sharp, jagged letters. You took my life. Now I'll take yours. I felt a cold shiver crawl down my spine. This wasn't over. Not yet. That night I sat in my living room, staring at the note in my hands. The weight of everything pressed down on me, the months of betrayal, the carefully laid plans for revenge, and now this spiraling mess. Sarah called me again. Are you safe? She asked. Yeah, I replied. But Mark's lost it. She paused for a moment before speaking again. Then you need to end this. For good. I spent the next day preparing. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't about to charge into danger without thinking things through. But I knew Mark wouldn't stop. Late in the afternoon, I received another message. Meet me where it all started. Come alone. The bathhouse. Of course. It felt poetic in a twisted way, that the final confrontation would take place at the scene of the original betrayal. I grabbed my coat, slipped a small pocket knife into my jacket, and drove to the bathhouse. The place was dark when I arrived, its windows boarded up, the faint smell of chlorine still hanging in the air. It had been closed down for months after the scandal that rocked our family. I pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The sound of dripping water echoed through the empty halls as I made my way to the central pool area. And there he was. Mark stood at the edge of the pool, his silhouette lit by a single flickering light above. He looked thinner, more hollow than the last time I'd seen him. You actually came, he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. I stood still, keeping my distance. This ends tonight, Mark. He laughed, a broken, bitter sound that bounced off the tiles. You think you've won, don't you? You think you've come out on top because you exposed me, humiliated me, destroyed everything I had. You did that to yourself, I said firmly. Mark's face twisted with rage. No. You did this. You could have let it go. You could have walked away. But instead, you turned everyone against me. He took a step closer to the edge of the pool, his hands trembling. But now we both lose. Before I could react, Mark pulled something from his pocket, a small, rusted revolver. I froze. The world went silent except for the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Mark raised the gun, his hand shaking so badly I wasn't sure he could even aim properly. This is your fault, he said through gritted teeth. I took a slow step forward, keeping my hands visible. Mark, put it down. This isn't the way. His eyes flickered with something, hesitation maybe. But it was gone in an instant. You don't get to tell me what to do anymore, he spat. And then, without warning, he turned the gun on himself. The sound of the shot rang out through the empty bathhouse, sharp and final. Mark's body crumpled to the tile floor, the gun clattering from his lifeless hand. For a moment I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then I stumbled forward, dropping to my knees beside him. It was over. Truly, finally over. The aftermath was a blur. The police, the questions, the endless paperwork. The official story was simple. Mark had called me to the bathhouse, made a final stand, and ended his own life. But that wasn't the real ending, not yet. A week later, I received one final message. It was from an unknown number. "It's not over." The message was short, unnerving, and straightforward. "It's not over." I stared at the screen, feeling an icy dread seep into my bones. I had thought the storm had passed, Mark was dead, Anna was gone, and I was rebuilding my life piece by piece. But this message? It threw everything into question. Who could it be? For a moment, I wondered if someone else from my past had come forward, seeking vengeance for the lies I'd exposed. Maybe a distant relative. Maybe someone connected to Anna. Or maybe, just maybe, this was someone new, someone I had never anticipated. I didn't answer the message immediately. I couldn't. There was no room for panic anymore, no room for rash decisions. I needed to think. The next few days passed in a haze. I tried to ignore the gnawing feeling at the back of my mind, but it kept coming back, growing louder. The uncertainty. The feeling that I was being watched. Then, one evening, I returned home to find my door slightly ajar. My heart skipped a beat. I entered cautiously, half expecting someone to jump out of the shadows. The house was eerily quiet. But then I saw it. There, on the kitchen table, was another note. This one was even more cryptic than the last. "You think you're safe. You think you're free. But you're wrong." I felt a sickening twist in my stomach. Whoever was behind this wasn't done with me. They weren't finished punishing me for my role in exposing their secrets. I thought about going to the police, but I knew that wouldn't help. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something crucial. I wasn't dealing with just any angry ex-lover or betrayed family member. This person had something else in mind. It wasn't just revenge anymore. It was something personal. Something far more dangerous. For the next few days, I stayed on high alert, constantly looking over my shoulder, checking my locks, making sure everything was in order. It wasn't living, it was surviving. Then, late one night, as I was scrolling through messages, I got another notification. This time, it wasn't a text. It was a video. My heart sank when I saw the thumbnail. It was a blurry shot of me standing at my front door, taken through a window. I clicked play. The video was shaky, grainy. It started with a view of the street, then zoomed in on me, my face illuminated by the light from the porch. I watched myself in disbelief as the camera followed me inside, silently. The footage ended with a message typed across the screen. "Now I have everything." I didn't waste a second. I gathered what little I could, made sure everything was locked up tight, and left. I drove aimlessly, unsure where I was going but knowing I couldn't stay home anymore. That's when I received a call. It was Sarah. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice strained. I hesitated for a moment before replying. "I don't know. Someone's been following me. They've been watching me for days. I don't know who it is, but they've been sending me these messages." Sarah was silent for a moment. "You need to get out of town. Now." The next morning, I packed my things and left. It wasn't just to escape. It was to get ahead of whatever was coming. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. No one needed to know. As I drove, I thought back to everything that had happened, the affair, the lies, the twisted dance of betrayal that had led me here. Mark was gone. Anna was far away. And yet, the war wasn't over. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was behind this had been watching me the entire time, waiting for the right moment to strike. But what was the end game? What were they after? I didn't have the answers, but I was determined to find out. It wasn't long before I arrived at a small town, far from everything I knew. I rented a cheap motel room and laid low, staying inside as much as possible, monitoring my phone for any new developments. That's when the final message came. It was from the same unknown number. "You don't get to run. This isn't over. It's just beginning." My heart pounded in my chest. I was no longer running from a person, I was running from a ghost. Whoever this was, they weren't going to let me forget. And in that moment, I realized the truth. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about control. Power. Manipulation. They were playing with me. I had been part of their game from the beginning. And no matter how far I ran, no matter how much I tried to distance myself from it all, they would keep coming until I lost everything. And they knew it. I was done running. I didn't know how this would end, but I was ready to face whatever came next. The game had gone on long enough. And now, it was time to turn the tables. It had been a week since the last message, and I had done everything in my power to keep moving, keep staying one step ahead. But the truth was, I had nowhere left to run. Every corner I turned, every new town I visited, the weight of the past was right there with me. The constant dread of being hunted, followed, stalked, it never left me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. It was like my entire existence had been reduced to a series of texts and videos, to someone pulling strings in the dark, watching every move I made. And then, on the 7th night, as I sat in my motel room, staring out at the barren streets, it hit me. I had been playing the victim for too long. I had spent months running from Mark's shadow, from Anna's betrayal, from the fear of whatever was still lurking out there. But I wasn't the person they thought I was. I wasn't weak. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let someone else control my life. I stood up, determination settling into my bones. It was time to end this. The first step was simple. I needed to take control of the situation. I couldn't keep hiding behind my phone, playing their games. I had to find out who was behind all of this. But I had learned something important over the past months. Mark wasn't the mastermind. He had been a puppet, just like me. Whoever was behind this, they had the strings. And I needed to cut those strings once and for all. I didn't waste any more time. I headed straight for the one place that had been connected to all of this, my family's home. The moment I walked through the door, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't just the stillness in the air. It wasn't just the way the house felt, empty. It was the note. On the kitchen counter, written in the same jagged handwriting, was a message. You should have stayed away. Now it's too late. I didn't flinch. This time, I wasn't going to be caught off guard. I knew the game now. I knew how they played it. And this time, I was ready to play too. I didn't call the police. I didn't tell anyone what I was about to do. I had no more trust to give. Instead, I went straight to the source. The only person who could have orchestrated everything. The one person whose actions, from the very beginning, had caused this ripple effect of destruction in my life. My uncle. The journey to his house was a blur. My mind was too focused on the task at hand. I reached his house just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the driveway. The house was dark, quiet, almost too quiet. I knew he was home. When I knocked on the door, I wasn't greeted by a warm, welcoming voice. Instead, there was only silence. Then the door cracked open, and I saw him. Mark's former accomplice. The man who had been pulling the strings. For a moment, neither of us said anything. We just stood there, staring at each other. Then he spoke. I knew you'd come. I didn't respond. I stepped forward, and he opened the door wider, stepping aside. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. You're a hard man to track down, I said, my voice cold. He didn't flinch. You really think you can fix everything? He asked. You think you can end all of this with just one visit? I didn't answer. Instead, I took a step closer. I came here for one reason, I said, my voice low. To end this. To end you. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was cold, calculating, and full of arrogance. You've always been so predictable, he said. Always thinking you can control things. But you're not the one in control here. I am. I didn't hesitate. In one swift motion, I pulled the small pocket knife I had carried with me for months and shoved it into his side. His eyes widened in shock, his hand going to the wound as he gasped for breath. You never understood, did you? I said, my voice a calm, steady whisper. He collapsed to the floor, blood spilling across the tile. For a moment I stood over him, my heart pounding, my mind racing. But I didn't feel the rush of satisfaction I had expected. There was no elation, no victory. Only emptiness. I left his house without looking back. As I drove into the night, I realized something important. The revenge, the game, the constant cycle of lies and manipulation, it was all over. But it wasn't the way I had imagined. No, it wasn't a grand finale. It wasn't a glorious victory over my enemies. It was just the end of a chapter. A chapter that would never be written again. And for the first time in months, I felt free. The next day, I got a call from Sarah. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice soft but concerned. "I am," I replied. "I finally am." I didn't need to explain what had happened. She didn't need to know the details. We had both been through enough. I hung up, staring out the window at the quiet road ahead of me. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. And I knew that no matter what came next, I was ready for it.